You learned early that silence carries weight, not the comfortable kind, the kind that presses against your chest in rooms full of people, the kind that made you fluent in reading faces and measuring tone, in becoming whatever version of yourself the moment required. You became good at it, too good, and somewhere along the way, the performance stopped feeling like a choice. There's a particular loneliness that comes with being raised as both the center of attention and the keeper of your own company, a paradox that shapes you in ways you won't understand until decades later, when you're sitting across from someone you love and you realize you've never learned how to ask for what you need, because needing felt dangerous, because being everything to your parents meant you could never be a burden to them. Here's the quiet truth no one tells you about growing up as an only child. The thing that made you resilient also made you unreachable. The self-sufficiency that was celebrated, that was necessary, that kept the household balanced, it became the wall between you and intimacy, between you and rest, between you and the version of yourself that didn't have to perform competence just to justify taking up space. You weren't given siblings to fight with, to share with, to learn the messy arithmetic of relational compromise. Instead, you were given the full weight of your parents' hopes, fears, projections, and unmet dreams. And you carried it, because that's what you do when you're the only one. But no one prepared you for what happens when that weight doesn't go away, when you're 35 and still can't disappoint anyone, when you're successful by every external measure, but you feel like an imposter in your own life, when you've spent so long being observed that you forgot how to exist without an audience. This is about the invisible cost of being the sole focus, the burden of being both enough and never enough, the psychology of the only child. Let's begin with what this actually is. Being an only child isn't just a family structure, it's a relational ecosystem. It's the architecture of your early nervous system, built in a home where every emotional shift revolved around you and every disappointment landed directly on your shoulders. Psychologists call this enmeshment without dilution. There were no other children to absorb the intensity, no siblings to redirect your parents' anxiety or ambition. You became the singular container for all of it. Think of it this way. In a garden with multiple plants, water and sunlight get distributed. Nutrients flow between roots. There's competition, yes, but also balance. Now imagine a garden with a single plant. Every ounce of water, every beam of light, every nutrient, and every toxin goes to that one organism. It either flourishes under the pressure or becomes overgrown, root-bound, unable to exist in any other environment. That was your childhood, and it shaped three core psychological patterns that follow only children into adulthood. First, precocious maturity and parentification. You were surrounded by adults. You learned their language, adopted their concerns, absorbed their emotional states as though they were your own. This isn't inherently harmful. Many only children develop extraordinary emotional intelligence, verbal fluency, and intellectual curiosity because of it. But there's a shadow side. Parentification occurs when a child takes on the emotional or logistical responsibilities of a parent. For many only children, this is subtle. It's not that you were asked to cook dinner or pay bills. It's that you learned to manage your parents' moods, to minimize your own needs so they wouldn't feel inadequate, to become the source of their pride, their joy, their sense of purpose, because you intuited, correctly, that their happiness was tied to your performance. Children aren't supposed to carry that, but you did. 2. Hypervigilance and the observing self. Growing up as the only child means growing up as the only subject of observation. Every developmental milestone, every grade, every friendship, every emotional reaction, it was all documented, analyzed, worried over. You became acutely aware of being watched, and in response, you developed what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to observe yourself observing yourself. You learned to split your awareness, One part experiencing, one part monitoring how that experience would be received. This is why so many only children describe feeling like they're performing even in private, why rest feels uncomfortable, why being alone feels both natural and unbearable. Your nervous system was trained to stay alert, to anticipate, to adjust. That's hypervigilance, and it doesn't turn off just because you're an adult now. 3. Ambivalent attachment and the self-reliance trap. Attachment theory tells us that children develop relational blueprints based on early caregiving. Only children often develop what's called ambivalent or anxious attachment, not because their parents were absent, but because the attachment was too intense, too singular, too loaded with expectation. You needed them desperately, and you resented needing them, so you learned to need no one. Self-reliance became your identity. You told yourself you preferred being alone, that you didn't need help, that asking for support was a sign of weakness, and on the surface that narrative worked. You became capable, independent, someone people admired, but underneath there was a child who never learned that it's safe to depend on others, that relationships can hold your weight without collapsing, that you don't have to earn love through achievement. This is the schema. I am only valuable when I am competent. I am only safe when I am in control. I am only lovable when I need nothing. And that schema dictates everything.
Here's what they don't tell you about becoming the person everyone can rely on. You stop knowing who you are when no one's watching. The German poet Rainer Rilke once wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." But what if the dragon isn't external? What if it's the part of you that learned to suppress every inconvenient emotion, every selfish desire, every moment of weakness, because you were too important to be messy? There's an invisible grief that only children carry, not the kind you can name or mourn. It's the grief of a childhood you never really had, the one where you could have been reckless, annoying, needy, inconsistent, and still been loved. Instead, you were mature, responsible, the good kid, and that became your prison. Philosopher Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask you wear for the world. But for only children, the persona isn't something you put on in public. It's something you wear even when you're alone, because you learned that love was conditional on your ability to be impressive, to not be a burden, to justify the sacrifices your parents made for you. So you became an adult who can't rest, who feels guilty for being sad, who apologizes for needing, who finds it easier to give than to receive, because receiving means admitting you're not self-sufficient. And if you're not self-sufficient, what are you? The core fear is this: if I stop performing, I will be abandoned. Not literally. Your parents probably love you. Your friends probably care. But deep in your nervous system, there's a pattern that says, my value is external. My worth is earned. If I fail, I disappear. And that fear complicates everything. It means you can't enjoy success because you're already anticipating the next expectation. It means you can't be vulnerable in relationships because vulnerability feels like exposure. It means you can't set boundaries because boundaries feel like rejection. It means you live in a constant state of low-level performance anxiety, auditioning for a love you already have but can't feel. This is the cost. You survived by becoming someone else. And now, you don't know how to stop.
Let's talk about what this actually looks like in your life now. You might find yourself unable to enjoy accomplishments. Every success comes with the immediate pressure of the next goal. Celebration feels performative. Resting feels like stagnation. You've internalized the idea that your worth is tied to output, so stopping, even for a weekend, feels existentially threatening. You might struggle with receiving. Compliments make you uncomfortable. Gifts feel like obligations. Help feels like pity. You've spent your entire life being the capable one, the person who has it together, and letting someone see you struggle feels like betraying the role you were assigned. You might notice a deep discomfort with conflict. Because you never had siblings to fight with, negotiate with, reconcile with, conflict feels catastrophic. Disagreement feels like abandonment. You learn to manage emotions, not express them. So when someone's upset with you, your first instinct isn't to defend yourself, it's to fix it, to apologize, to disappear. You might become adults who are extraordinarily lonely, even in relationships, because you never learned that intimacy requires mess, that being known means being imperfect, that the people who love you don't need you to have all the answers. You keep others at a distance, not through coldness, but through competence. You're generous, supportive, endlessly helpful, but you never let anyone see you fall apart. You might find it nearly impossible to ask for what you need, because needing was dangerous. Needing meant your parents worried. Needing meant you weren't as advanced as everyone said you were, so you learned to anticipate your own needs and meet them silently. And now, as an adult, you're in relationships where your partner has no idea what you actually want, because you've never learned how to say it. You might experience chronic guilt. Guilt for resting, guilt for saying no, guilt for not calling your parents enough, guilt for being unhappy when you have everything. Guilt is the residue of a childhood spent feeling responsible for other people's emotional well-being. You might feel like a fraud, because the version of yourself that people admire, the articulate, accomplished, self-sufficient one, doesn't match the version you experience internally. Inside, you feel young, uncertain, overwhelmed, but you can't let that show. So you live in the gap between who you are and who you've convinced everyone you are. These aren't personality flaws, they're survival mechanisms. And the beginning of healing is simply this: witnessing them without judgment, not fixing, not optimizing, just noticing. Oh, I'm doing that thing again, the thing where I apologize for needing, the thing where I perform competence instead of asking for help, the thing where I make myself small so no one feels burdened by me. Awareness doesn't erase the pattern, but it creates space around it, and in that space, something new becomes possible.
So, what does unlearning look like? It starts with something deceptively simple: giving yourself permission to be insufficient. Not forever, not in all contexts, but in small, deliberate moments. You let the dishes sit. You say, "I don't know," without offering a solution. You tell someone you're struggling without immediately reassuring them that you're fine. You practice being a person, not a project. Inner child reparenting becomes essential here. You go back to the part of you that learned self-reliance wasn't a choice, it was survival. And you tell that child, you don't have to be impressive anymore. You don't have to earn your place here. You are wanted, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. This isn't about blaming your parents. Most of them loved you fiercely, but love, when concentrated entirely on one child, can become a kind of pressure. And you internalized that pressure as identity. Shadow work means confronting the parts of yourself you've exiled. The needy part, the angry part, the part that resents carrying so much so young. The part that wishes sometimes you'd had a sibling, not because you needed one, but because you needed the relief of not being everything to everyone. Nervous system regulation becomes a practice. You learn that safety isn't something you achieve through control, it's something you cultivate through presence, through breath, through letting your body soften instead of staying braced for the next expectation. You start to notice when you're performing versus when you're being, and slowly you choose being more often. You practice asking, not demanding, not hinting, asking directly. I need help with this. I'd like you to listen without trying to fix it. I'm not okay right now, and I don't know what I need, but I need you to stay. It feels terrifying at first, like exposing yourself in a language you don't speak fluently, but it's the only way through. And perhaps most importantly,
You start choosing softness over survival mode. You let relationships be inefficient. You let yourself want things that don't make strategic sense. You let rest be unproductive. You let love be uncomplicated. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are." You spent your entire childhood being who your parents needed you to be, and then you spent your adulthood being who the world expected you to be. But the person you actually are, the one underneath the competence, underneath the maturity, underneath the self-reliance, that person has been waiting. Not to be fixed, not to be optimized, just to be seen. The goal isn't to erase the only child in you. That part of you is brilliant, intuitive, deeply capable. The goal is to let that part rest, to let it be one voice among many instead of the only one that's allowed to speak. Because you were never supposed to carry everything alone, and you don't have to anymore. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen in a way that's both uncomfortable and necessary, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. And if you're ready to keep exploring the hidden psychology behind the roles we didn't choose but learned to play, subscribe. We're just getting started. You're not broken. You're just finally learning how to be whole.